Speaking of making choices and trade-offs, Instagram wrote a cool article recently that I thought would be fun to cover because it's a look inside how they're running their Django app. So they want to basically take typed Python, like type annotations, which they're loving, right? They actually did a PyCon presentation, or I don't know if it's officially under Instagram, but Lucas Lenga covered basically how they're using types at Instagram when he was there. And that was really, really interesting. But they're like, look, we have a few HTTP endpoints. They've talked about how they're not doing microservices. They have a single Django app, and it has a few thousand HTTP endpoints in the one app on top of other stuff.
Wow.
That is a lot of API endpoints.
Yeah.
And they all exchange like rich types with validation. And so they asked the question, are methods in code have type annotations? We can check that with MyPy and stuff like that. But how do we have developers know whether their APIs are still matching what they should be? Because everything returns a JSON result or JSON response. Everything takes an HTTP post or a JSON object. And like, what are you going to do with that, right? So they went on this mission to try to add this typing to their API. So they came up with this decorator that they can put on a regular typed method that converts it to an HTTP endpoint in Django.
Okay.
Right. So I've got a regular function. It declares its variables. It declares they're of this certain type. It returns them of another type. And you just decorate this thing and boom, it becomes an HTTP endpoint that returns JSON based on what it exchanges JSON based on what comes in and what goes out, which is pretty cool. So that's a start. And it says, well, you're still just returning JSON responses. So how do you get better validation than that? So they decided to start using data classes for data exchange, because data classes have a type. They can be immutable because you can set the frozen decorator on them.
Yeah.
They have type validation through things like MyPy and whatnot, which is all really cool. But remember, they have millions of lines of code and thousands of endpoints in a single Django app, and they're not going to go, well, you know what? We're going to upgrade every single interaction to these data classes. Right? There's a bunch of dictionaries still going around. So have you heard about typed dict?
Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, it's really cool. So that comes out as one of the MyPy extensions, and it lets you create a dictionary, but then also express the types. Like this key is supposed to be an integer, and this key is supposed to be a date. And so for the older code that couldn't be written with data classes, well, it was just dictionaries, they added in typed dicts to help give validation to that, and explicit type definitions. Instead of saying this thing returns a dict, it can return a type that is a type dict, but still is compatible with the API. So that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, that's cool. This is interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And so they also talked about how do we so once we have these APIs and they have types and they have type validation, how do we communicate that back to people? So they leverage Open API to come up with very nice documentation. If you got the article open, Brian, you could scroll down, you can see like a very beautiful like API reference that was just automatically generated out of the API methods.
Yeah, Open API is really nice.
Yeah, so that's really cool. Now, what's also interesting is they go through this whole process of what they've done and how they've done it. And this is on Medium implicitly. It's on their blog, but their blog's running on Medium. So you can go and see the comments in there. And a lot of people are like, hey, this is cool. Why don't you use Pydantic? Which we've covered Pydantic before. It solves many of these problems for data exchange and validation. Another person like, you should use Fast API because Fast API has these typed API methods natively at the boundary. You don't have to like have this decorator that'll transform them into Django. That's really cool. But all of these are like, hey, I know you have a couple million lines of code for like a huge project in production. Why don't you rewrite that in Fast API? No, right? That's just not going to happen. So
I mean, they're already in Django. I was thinking, it's kind of like Fast API, except for they're in Django. So
yeah, different. Exactly. I mean, who wants to take on the job of rewriting the entire millions of lines of code when they've just gone through the process of upgrading Django and upgrading from Python 2 to 3 and so on. So there's a bunch of interesting comments about alternative ways to solve this problem if you were starting from scratch.
Yeah.
But I think it's also interesting to think about that. Now, one thing that did come out that they could use, somebody said, this is cool. And if you have typed APIs and nice documentation and you're already using Open API, why don't you check out Schema Thesis? So it's a tool. Let me know what you think about this one. It's a tool for testing your web apps based on their API definition. So it goes in reverse. It looks at the documentation and it says, okay, we're going to call your endpoint according to the documentation and see if it really matches that or not.
Yeah, it's really cool, actually.
Yeah, so I think that's actually pretty neat. I've never used this. Can't necessarily recommend it, but it seems pretty interesting if you've already got the Open API stuff in place. So I like that.
Yeah, Alexander Holtner brought it up, the Schema Thesis project up when I talked to him on Testing Code 107, and it sounds pretty neat.
Thank you for watching this segment of the Python Bytes podcast. This video was made during the recording of the full episode. Visit pythonbytes.fm and get the whole story. Subscribe to the podcast and get the entire episode delivered to your phone. Please support our work by taking one of the courses at pythonbytes.fm/courses or learning PyTest with Brian's book at pythonbytes.fm/PyTest. Finally, visit our sponsor shown on the screen here. Visit the link on the screen and get the special offer for Python Bytes and YouTube listeners. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.